Oh, I love the applause. And one who teaches hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok how to make sense of the news, Kelsey Russell. We're delighted to welcome Kelsey to Hunter College, better known online as the Print Princess. Kelsey is a rising star in the world of news literacy. She's a content creator, producer, and all-around media maven who's helping her more than 100,000 TikTok followers make sense of the news without losing their minds from information overload. She's the host of First Stop News, a show that helps kids understand the headlines, the creator of Chronicled, a podcast where she dives into the backstories of legacy media, from the history of Vogue and GQ to a fascinating interview with the owner of Manhattan's own magazine cafe. A proud Atlanta neighborhood, Kelsey graduated from Boston University in 2022 and earned her master's degree in sociology and education at Columbia University's Teachers College. In other words, she's fluent in both TikTok and teaching theory, two things not found in the same sentence very often. But that makes her uniquely qualified to help us navigate this challenging information ecosystem that we find ourselves in. Now, most of you know one of our most highly regarded journalism professors, David Alm. David has been a journalist since 1999, which means he's worked in the news industry through the rise of blogs, the fall of print, the eternal debate over whether anyone still reads past the headlines. Over the years, he's written for just about every major magazine that's still in print and a few that aren't: GQ, Runner's World, Mother Jones, Men's Journal, Forbes, and many others, focusing on long-form features and profiles. His story, The Marathon Men Who Can't Go Home, for GQ, was named one of the 6 best features of the year by Longreads. And he's been included twice in this year's Best Sports Writing Anthology. David has taught journalism at Hunter College since 2006, shaping the next generation of journalists with his expertise in long-form writing and news literacy. He holds degrees from St. Olaf College and the University of Chicago. And fun fact, he's an avid runner and has been running as long as he's been writing professionally. And rumor has it, he can run a marathon faster than some of his students can turn in their first draft. In his students' defense, he's really fast. Please join me in welcoming Kelsey Russell and David Alm.
Thank you, Professor McCarthy. I did not write that.
Yeah, those were incredible bios. Those were good.
Okay, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Kelsey, for joining us. I just wanted to give a quick backstory on how Kelsey came to be here, how I got to know Kelsey initially back in the spring. Professor McCarthy read an interview in Columbia Journalism Review, and she sent it around to all of us who teach news literacy in the digital age. There are a good handful of us, and said she's talking about news literacy, like the way that, especially in her final question, the final answer, or the answer, Kelsey's answer to the final question was right in line with exactly what we teach and the way in which, even down to the language that we use in a lot of cases. And I was just blown away. I read the interview and I thought, wow, this is an incredibly astute observer of media and has arrived at this kind of through a unique path. Like, she kind of arrived at it on her own, through her own approach to media, and also through, and she'll get into this as well, a lifelong appreciation for journalism, but an appreciation that kind of waned over time. So we'll come back to that. And so I did what you probably shouldn't do. So don't do as I say, but I reached out to her on Instagram. I DM'd her, and I was like, hey, so I teach journalism at Hunter College, and I just read your interview in CJR, and I was really impressed. Would you mind hopping on a video call with me? And so she did, and we had a really nice chat back in the spring. And we put together this idea for a discussion, kind of a fireside chat, quote unquote. And anyway, so thank you for coming. Thank you to Kelsey for being here. Thanks to Kelly and to Cecil for helping to organize, and Peter, the whole team. So with that, let's jump into it. Kelsey,
Yes.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about you? Give us your background.
Sure. I first want to say thank you all for being here too. I know college and courses can be heavy, and it's October, which is like not the most fun time in school. I feel like my backstory pretty much starts as me growing up in Atlanta. My dad was an avid New York Times reader, so I would watch him read the newspaper every day. And it was just something that he might like slide me an article on the counter, but I wouldn't really pay attention to it. And then I ended up going to Boston University and I studied sociology there. I was fascinated by how to make systems of education more equitable. I always felt like I had a beautiful time in school, and the older I got, the more that I realized a lot of people weren't having these fantastic experiences, and a lot of it had to do with access to resources, socioeconomic status. So I came to be like, I'm gonna figure out how to make education more equitable for everybody. Found myself at Teachers College after diving more into sociology and education. And I really found myself in the summer going into my second year of my master's program extremely anxious. I was I was just having a lot of self-doubt, self-worth issues, and at the same time, I felt like I didn't know anything. Like I would walk into my classes about policy, and it felt like all the students around me knew what was going on in the world. And I questioned, like, am I even consuming any media to know what's going on in the news? Thought to myself, I think all the news I'm consuming is on social media. I was also in therapy, still in therapy, and my therapist suggests to deal with this anxiety, why don't you do something that made little Kelsey happy? And I thought about how I did love to read like print with my dad. I love when now looking back, I did love that he would send me New York Times clippings as I was in college. And I was like, I'm just gonna ask for a New York Times subscription for my birthday. Maybe this will make me feel a little better, get me off my phone in this anxious loop that I'm in. I had already had a following from lifestyle and humorous content, and I made that first newspaper video about how I found the physical print so much more fascinating and better for my own media consumption, and that's where everything started to take off. So that's, I guess, the background and how I'm somehow sitting here.
Yeah, great. So I want to come back to this feeling of being, I guess, wanting to make education more equitable, and also how that translates now to media literacy and your passion for that. But I want to hang on that bit that you mentioned towards the end of doing something that's a little bit more nourishing, feeling like something that makes you happy. What is it about, and how you realize like consuming news via social media or just consuming social media, you didn't feel nourished at the end of the day. You didn't feel like you were happy. You felt like you were just sort of like in this endless loop of content, but not necessarily. What was it about reading the news with your dad that gave you that sense of happiness? And how do you define happiness, I guess, in that context?
Yeah, I mean, wow. It doesn't feel like there are that many happy things going on in the world right now and in the news. So I think to even put happiness and news in the same sentence is wild in my mind. But I do think, we're addicted to our phones. Like, we're addicted to social media. I have started sleeping with my phone outside of my room because the first thing I find myself doing is scrolling. And I think, I can't imagine anybody in this room gets off of TikTok, gets off of Instagram, and feels better about themselves. Like, it's a hard scroll of comparison. And I think when I was consuming my news mainly on social media, the range of emotions that you go through when you're on social media is from feeling left out, is angry, is maybe a little bit of happiness, is sadness. And then in the midst of all of these feelings, of whether it's a dump or how to layer your skincare, there's a post about genocide. That's like crazy. How do you even wrap your brain around that? And I think I noticed when I started consuming my news in print, what it encouraged me to do is have conversation. Suddenly I'm like, clipping out New York Times clippings, and the thing I was making fun of my dad for doing, now I'm sending to my friends. I didn't know my friends' addresses. And now, hey, I have a piece of mail I want to give to you. So I think the happiness comes from, maybe it's the relief of being able to physically hold something, taking my time to do something that is for me when I want to do it, versus feeling like it's forced upon me in an algorithm. And then the happiness is that I feel more confident about what I want to talk about, whether it's going to a party, whether it's a date, whether it's just hanging out with my friends. I have information to bring to the table that I feel like is trustworthy. But I'm also just talking to my friends about the news versus sitting in an algorithm where I'm not really talking to anybody. I'm just intaking overloads of emotion.
That's great. Yeah. This reminds me of years ago, regrettably, I had to cancel my subscription to the New York Times because it was just piling up and I was generating too much paper in my apartment, and I went digital. But this didn't happen that long ago. I held on for a really long time. But I remember I was reading an article once about, and this is to Kelsey's point about like the happiness that reading in print can bring. I would lay it out and I would go through my the broadsheet, and I would just sort of like scan the headlines, and you find yourself reading things that you would never think to read and that the algorithm would never feed you. I found myself reading an article about a truck in Norway that had somehow like had an accident and gone sideways, and this is funny because nobody got hurt. It was a truck carrying a bunch of cheese, and then the truck exploded, and the driver had gotten out of it by that point. And so there's this truck of burning cheese on the side of the highway in Norway, which is just sort of like a hilarious, weird thing to think about. And it's like that the algorithm would never feed me that story. And so I wonder if there's like an example that you can share of something that like an article that you found yourself reading that just delighted you, that you wanted to cut out and share with your friends.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I always give the example too for people, like, if an article has my ex's last name, I'm reading it. Like if it brings up a place I've always wanted to go, if it has colors and stuff that interest me, I'm reading it. And this isn't too much of a wacky example, but I'm a big sports fan, and I don't listen to sports podcasts though. Like they just really don't move the needle for me. And I came across this article that was talking about how all of these sports podcasts have become extremely political, and this is not as fun as the cheese story, I have to say, now that I'm talking about it. But it talked about how like sports was once the last like apolitical space that existed in this country, and now it's extremely politicized. And I actually ended up, they mentioned one of these baseball players in there, and something about his batting average. I'm not a really big baseball fan, I'm more of a football fan, and I ended up reaching out to like a very old friend who was a great baseball player and calling them, like, what does this mean? Like, what does this batting average mean? And I think while it's not a wacky story, it's an example of how me reading print has allowed me to reconnect with other people. But absolutely, with your cheese story, I end up consuming more fun and good media. And you also have my brain going in a way where I think the beauty of print is that when I open a newspaper or magazine, I can check in with myself and say, I'm already having a bad day by 10 a.m. I don't want to read anything that's going to not make me feel good. I'm going to flip straight to the food section, straight to the lifestyle section, and consume media that's going to fill me up. Maybe if I have a lot of energy and I'm inquisitive, I'm going to read something that might be longer in depth. So I think it gives me that opportunity to check in with myself and then decide what I actually want to consume, which is pretty much impossible on social media.
That's great. Yeah, because it all gets flattened on social media into one endless scroll. Whereas you're describing a situation where you can kind of scan and make the conscious choice of, I'm going to this section. You're much more intentional, much more deliberate.
It's like agency that we no longer have in how we consume.
Yes, exactly. So what is your process, like on a daily, how do you get up in the morning and not look at your phone for the first hour and read the paper? How do you do it?
Okay, something about this adulting thing, I don't like the morning. I'm not a morning person, but one time somebody told me that I think the secret to adulting is you have to make the things that are the worst very exciting. So now I try to take a walk in the morning without my phone. I get a coffee from a fun shop, and then I usually come back and I read a newspaper in the morning with breakfast. I try my best, or I might read one before I go to bed. I've actually really been enjoying that. But ultimately my process looks like, reading at least 3 to 4 different newspapers a week, trying to pick up a magazine. And when I'm reading it, it's interesting because now that this is my job, I sometimes have to remind my brain, you can just you can just read to enjoy. Sometimes I'm like looking for that article that will be viral or will go viral, and that can cloud my experience of just wanting to learn more. But I'm typically reading, and if I find an article that I feel like, I'm looking typically for three things. One is something that is easily digestible. Like I recently just made a TikTok about how college enrollment is up in Georgia, but the rest of or in the South overall, but the rest of the country is struggling. And I'm like, okay, this is about school, this is about education. I know my audience, like my 18 to 24 audience is pretty strong, so this could be interesting to them. I'm also looking for something that naturally piques my curiosity. I'm from the South, I love school, so I'm gonna be excited to talk about it. And then the third thing is maybe it can twirl in a little element that's uncomfortable to talk about, whether that's Southern culture, whether that's this like kind of rise of conservatism that we might be seeing on TikTok that makes people uncomfy. So I'm looking for those three things, I annotate it, and then I put my camera up and I'm like, hey, this is what I read.
And you don't rehearse at all? Like you just sit down and it's totally on the fly, like this is how I'm gonna, like...
No, I talk to myself in my shower.
All right.
I really do. So a lot of jokes that I say I have rehearsed, but most of it is truly like off the top of my head. But if there's a joke in there, I doubt I made it up on the spot.
Yeah, yeah. And these articles that you're choosing, where are they usually coming from?
Usually coming from, I do get the New York Times every day, so they are heavily in my rotation. But most of the articles I find that are the best are coming from like a lot of independent magazines right now. And that's why I actually interviewed the owner, Mr. Manish of Magazine Cafe, because his place has been my go-to spot once a week to just pick up a random magazine that I've never heard of. So I'd say about 50% newspapers. If somebody sends me like a local newspaper from their place or I've traveled, I'll always pick it up and try to make a video. So I'd say that media diet, as much, it sometimes has to do with what is just coming consistently, but also like where are my feet taking me and what can I pick up on my way.
Tell us a little bit about Magazine Cafe, because I suspect a lot of us don't know about it. So yeah.
Sure. So it's a magazine store that's on West 37th Street, and it's almost like designed like a bookstore. It feels so cozy and comfortable in there, and it's one of the last magazine stores that is left in New York City. They have such a wide array, especially of international magazines, like anything you can think of, whether your niche is cars, whether it's sports, whether it's gardening, there was a magazine I read about dolls, like literal cloth dolls that they sell. It's a great place. I recommend you go. And it also makes great gifts. Like I get a lot of gifts nowadays. If I give somebody, I'm like, take a magazine too, you should read. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I remember I once saw a magazine called Floor Covering Weekly,
Oh.
which struck me for two reasons. A, there's a magazine devoted to floor coverings, and B, it comes out every week.
Hey.
Like, what can you possibly have to say about floor coverings? So let's talk a little bit about the Times, and let's talk about something a little bit more serious.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you've talked about before, and you actually go into this in the Columbia Journalism Review piece, and something that I've talked about with my classes, is this idea of, like, the news has to feel relevant to you. You need to feel like it matters to you. And this is something that I always wonder about, like, how... I didn't grow up loving the news. I didn't grow up needing to know what was going on in the world. I grew up caring about very different things. And at some point, it clicked, and I was like, I do like this. I do like reading the news. It reminds me of, this is kind of a funny association, but there was a show in the 80s called Different Strokes, and I remember there was a scene where Gary Coleman, it was like the scene where Gary Coleman's character, this little kid, realized that he liked reading, and he was reading A Tale of Two Cities, and his eyes lit up, and he was like, whoa, because he's imagining this battle, and it was like, that was the moment that it clicked for him that reading is fun. And for me, that was a really resonant moment, because I remember when I was reading, and I thought, wow, reading is fun. So talking about, like, news mattering, like, reading the news isn't always going to be fun, but it will click at some point, and you'll realize that it matters, right? One of the problems with a newspaper like the New York Times is that it can shut people out.
Yes.
Right? And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about something that you've addressed before, this idea of seeing yourself in the media and how you navigate that.
Yeah. I speak a lot in analogies, and I think I made this TikTok about one, like the decline of local journalism is, I would argue, it is the source of so many issues in this country. And I think, unfortunately, for folks who live in like metropolitan areas, it might not have, I didn't even know it was a problem until I started this whole journey, because I've lived in cities my entire life where it always felt like my stories have been reflected, especially being from Atlanta. That's such a predominantly Black city where Black people have power and have the power of the pen. I didn't grow up in a space where I didn't see people like me reflected. It wasn't until I really started this journey that I started to understand there are these pockets of the world and of our country where, you know, your stoplight being out is actually a really, really big deal to you. And the fact that somebody took away your magazine, took away your newspaper that discussed that, I would be angry too. So I use the thought of analogies because I'm a big, like, I love a good sitcom. Like, I love a good Modern Family. That's probably one of my favorites. But I think also love like Desperate Housewives. I'm a big Real Housewives fan. All of this to say, I think we all like this kind of concept of TV where the characters are something you can see in yourself in one of the characters. Maybe even you can see something that you hate about yourself in the characters or you want to improve upon in yourself. And for some people and for some stories, like a sitcom coming out feels like a relief. I even feel like for Abbott Elementary, for example, so many people who are educators, like, this is so nice to have these experiences reflected on my TV. People who are from Philly are like, it's so cool to see these references of the Philadelphia Eagles on my screen. So that feeling of relief and excitement you get when you see yourself is what news should feel like. Like, somebody really cares about what's going on in my world, and they want more people to know about it. Now, the feeling of that not existing or being taken away is fearful, it's frightening, it makes you angry. And so I think it's so important that these legacy institutions like the New York Times completely change the way that they are not covering the stories of the people who I wouldn't even say matter the most, but matter just as much as the communities that they're covering. So I think when we think about news and we want it to be happy and exciting, you got to cover the people that are reading it, or especially the people who aren't reading it, because they're not reading it because they don't feel covered.
Right.
So that's what I would have to say on that note.
Yeah, and and the New York Times is an interesting case because on the one hand, they do really good coverage of serious social issues. They do very good investigative work. Mm-hmm. They do great long-form pieces and they do great conflict coverage and all of that. But I always use this example when I'm having this conversation. I remember reading an article, and this is typical of the New York Times. I remember reading an article years ago it was in the style section, which is usually the worst offender in this department. And it was about the new, quote unquote, the new mom uniform of Park Slope. And it was like, this incredibly ridiculous article about what this handful of women that the writer obviously personally knows are wearing. And it was like, the uniform consisted of like a designer bag with a chunky strap and clogs. And I remember thinking, like, why is this in the New York Times? Why does this deserve coverage? And it's not that there is no place for trivial style coverage in the New York Times, but here's the problem. There was no counterexample. There was no article ever about the new mom uniform of Brownsville. Mm-hmm. There was no article about the new mom uniform of Hunts Point. So it reflected the bias of the editorial newsroom, right? Like, who's editing, who's writing, people who live in Park Slope and places like Upper West Side, that kind of thing. And so it ends up, it's not so much that the newspaper isn't covering serious issues or populations other than the communities that might work in the newsroom, but when the kind of the lighter pieces, but when they cover it, it's always in the negative. The lighter, more humanizing, more gentle coverage, more humorous coverage tends to be geared toward a very specific, narrow demographic, right? And so I guess that maybe leads us back to like the importance of local news and the importance of smaller publications. I wonder, like, are there any that you personally love that kind of embody that dedication to like the stoplight that is out, or like a community that you feel is served really well by that local publication?
Yeah. I think, interestingly enough, like one of my favorite examples is I went to like Martha's Vineyard, and I would go there growing up, and it was interesting because as a visitor there, like people don't really interact with the local population. And I actually started to understand more what was going on locally there when I still picked up their paper. So like really examples, especially I am very fascinated by towns that have a lot of summer tourism, and then their local community is supporting the tourism, and then after people leave, the newspaper still exists, the magazine still exists. So I don't know if it's actually like a favorite that I have, but I will say that anytime I'm traveling somewhere that my feet don't typically take me, or that is a popular destination throughout a certain period of time, their papers will always be interesting to me. The Marshall Project even now has a lot of media that is written by incarcerated people, and that has been really interesting to me because that is a population that, right, like your ability to speak is how you participate in democracy. It's how you actually voice what is going on. And when we think about incarcerated people, it's like, what is their world? Is their world still? What's going on? What's important? And so I think that that has been one of my favorite medias to consume, because I think, even for an example of a New York Times, like how New York Times will write about somebody who is incarcerated would be completely different from somebody who is actually incarcerated writing about their story. So I think that those are examples of like local media that I really enjoy, is like the niche and just places I probably would never go to unless work took me there or travel took me there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Excuse me. Now, you've mentioned before, and we've talked about like this idea, let's talk about like the, I guess, convergence of journalism and reporting and influencers, right? Yeah. And meeting people where they are. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to you to meet people where they are and how you use your platform to advance your mission?
Yeah, I kind of, just what I was saying, I mean, first thing I do even this morning, like I got on my phone and scrolled. So we have to, let me back up. I feel like there has been a shift amongst generations of like digital experiences and in-person experiences. I think for a lot of people that are leading journalism now, they see digital tools like your phone and your social media as something that will enhance your, let me say this, sorry guys, this part always confuses me because it's like an idea that came to my mind a couple weeks ago, is that people who are leading journalism, right, they see the idea of social media and the pages as it's supposed to enhance your in-person experiences. So if I go somewhere, if I'm a newsroom and I have social media, I'm able to enhance what's going on in the real world experiences through posting, through making videos. I would actually argue that most people need, can I be real with you, David? Have you ever talked and like, you're like, what am I talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had one of those moments. So would you mind if you I'm like, wait, where did my brain go?
No, that's good.
Would you mind if you re-ask the question?
We've all been there.
Right? I was like, no.
Absolutely. And I appreciate so much that you acknowledged it in
You
real
have
time. So basically, like, recognizing that this idea of meeting people where they are, right? And recognizing that as an influencer, like you've said, I'm not a reporter, I'm a storyteller, right? And recognizing that people don't trust the New York Times. They aren't reading long articles. They are on TikTok all the time. And so they haven't all had that aha moment, that like Gary Coleman reading Tale of Two Cities moment where you're like, oh my God, news is amazing. I love this, I want to read the if they haven't had that and you have this access to them, over 100,000 of them, what does that mean for you? Like how do you, and you've talked about this a little bit, but I'm just curious if you could like explain a little bit more of how you meet people where they are.
Got it. And thank you guys for meeting me where I was with my brain fart. I think it's like, we as a society, I don't think I'm single-handedly going to like change our obsession and our addiction to social media, right? And I think a lot of journalists and especially legacy institutions right now are trying to do that versus dealing with the fact that, yeah, like we scroll a lot. And I think by meeting people where I'm at, what I try to do with my content is say, if you're going to scroll, if you come across my video, maybe you'll feel just a little bit more inspired to go experience something that's off of your scroll, right? Even if it's just while I'm walking down the street and I'm on my phone, if I happen to see a magazine, maybe let me just touch it. Maybe just let me flip it open. So I think it's important to meet people where they are, because when you don't, you almost tell them what they're doing is wrong. When it's hard for me to believe that the people who aren't leading these institutions are also scrolling, are also not getting their news from news personalities. I also think the topic of news personalities is interesting when we think about meeting people where they are, because the lack of trust that exists in media has consistently been declining, and I have my ideas for why that exists. But Gen Z, Gen Alpha, we're like a curious generation. We have questions to ask. Why are you writing about what you're writing about? How does your experience growing up impact why you're talking about Park Slope moms and not the Brownsville moms? And what about the moms that lived in Park Slope before it was the Park Slope we know now? So I think that we're a curious generation that, as much as we want the truth, we also want to know how you got to the truth. And I think that what influencers did is that they are able to kind of say it all. They don't follow the same rules as journalists, which is a problem because the two can get mixed up when you're just a viewer scrolling. But I think it's about, you know, I'm not a journalist, so I get the freedom to say a little bit more and to show my bias. And I'm able to meet people where they are, because people want bias a little bit. They want to know why I think what I think, but I'm able to bridge the gap of journalists who are truly approaching these stories with integrity and with a code of ethics, and introducing people to that in the format that they like, which is the news personality, the influencer. So I think that that's why it's important.
Great. Can we get a time check? What time is it? 1:05. Great, 1:05, that's perfect. We're going to open this up to Q&A in just a minute. And so think of questions that you might want to ask Kelsey. And there's a mic, there should be a mic that we have to pass around. Before we get there, I wanted to, where are we? This is the section, I just wanted to read this aloud, because I wanted to have an opportunity before we were done. This is the quote from the Q&A that inspired Professor McCarthy to send this around. Or not the quote, but it was from the answer that Kelsey gave that inspired Professor McCarthy to send it around. And I just think it's so spot on and so incredibly astute. So I just wanted to read your words back to you.
Sure, I'm excited.
And this is like really, it cuts to the core of what news literacy is all about and why it matters so much. Journalism is the second line of defense in democracy. The fact that we live in a place where we have journalists who can go and report on what is happening is an absolute privilege. I feel like if we don't consume news properly, if we don't understand that that's something that's very important to actually have, a functioning democracy, we'll end up with citizens who don't understand civics, who don't believe in their country, who become divided. It's important because how we function as a country, as a society, is by knowing what's going on, knowing where to look for information, knowing when things have gotten bad. So with that, I'd like to open this up to a Q&A from all of you. Who has the microphone? The microphone.
Right here.
Yeah, great.
Hi, my name is Afra. It's nice to meet you. I just wanted to ask that in class we were told to broaden our scope, I guess, in consumption of media, and we all looked at a chart, and it was like left skewed and then all the way to the right skewed, and I've noticed that a lot of my media consumption has been very left skewed, and it's been very oriented around like TikTok, of course, like scrolling on the algorithm, seeing what they show me. My question is, what are some like podcasts or like articles from the other side that you would recommend? Because we were told to like broaden our scope.
I wonder if it was it like the Ad Fontes media bias? Was it that one? I don't know. I love a media bias chart. I think something that I learned, I was like in a scholarship group and they told us you got to think of like your comfort zone as a hula hoop and you just got to dip your toe outside. Like I don't think, to read something that's completely opposite from what you're reading, to me is like probably never fully a good idea because it can make you very emotional. I always say one of my favorite things that has helped me veer into more like right-leaning is, it's not super right, but Wall Street Journal actually has helped me find a lot more authors, has helped me introduce me to some other opinions that might not, I think, traditionally align with myself. And I also would really check out just opinion sections of newspapers and opening your mind to why people are believing the opinions they're believing. So that's what I would say. I'm not as big as a podcast listener, and the podcasts I listen to are absolute trash. Like it's about Bravo TV and Real Housewives. So it's like, but yeah, that's like really the recommendation I typically make to people because it's available in the city. And I think their opinion section typically introduces me to some things I would not think about, but I understand why people completely think how they think.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe something a little controversial just to see, and I forgot to email my professor which one I was going to be like looking into, but I will be after this. But I was thinking about doing Candace's podcast because I always see clips of her on my For You page with no context whatsoever, and it's the most either the craziest things or just like something so random that I would not even like think about.
Yeah, and I also would recommend if you're gonna maybe do something like that, really listening to it without video. Like I think introducing yourself to new ideas sometimes without actually seeing who's speaking about them or how their body mannerisms are can also like open your mind a little. So I say if anybody was gonna do like a different podcast that's outside of your normal thinking, to like truly just listen, no video.
No video? Okay,
Yeah.
got it. I will be doing that. Thank you so much.
Any, right in the middle, and then right over here after that.
Hi, Kelsey. My name is Lucia. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
At the beginning, we were talking about how there's a lot going on in the world, and a lot of it is very negative. And it can get really overwhelming, like when I'm scrolling or just talking to people about what's going on, like seeing the notifications on my phone about all the different headlines. And for our class, we had to do a news blackout where no news for 48 hours. And while it was very tough, like not to be able to like see what was happening, it was also for me so liberating to be like, oh my God, I don't have to worry about all of this. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I was thinking about how big of a privilege it is for me to turn off my phone or be able to turn off my mind and not be able to think about that and just like focus on my life. So I just wanted to like know like your opinions of like checking your privilege, but also not being ignorant to what's going on in the world today.
Of course. I actually, like we just talked about this in our interview about how I oftentimes think about like when my parents, and especially my grandparents, were consuming media, there was a time of the day set aside for when you consumed your media, whether that was in the morning, whether that was at night. And I think now it feels like there is no time to consume the news. It's just blended in with everything. So I think, yes, it is a privilege to turn off your phone, and it absolutely is a privilege, especially right now that we live in a place where people can put, I wouldn't say pen to paper anymore, I don't know, fingers on a keyboard and talk about what's going on. But I also think it's important for all of us to take care of ourselves, and whether that means that, like for example, when I was saying I go on a walk in the morning, I think it's unsafe, I don't bring my phone, but like I just can't. Like I actually need a moment to digress. So I would say that it's important to be knowledgeable because you want to be a good, participate in society. But in order for you to participate in this society, like your body has to work. You have to be well enough to do so. So I think as soon as that news consumption feels like you're desensitized to it or that you don't care, that might be a time to like really just check out and also understand that you can be a really productive citizen by like being in your community and talking to people and helping people. And that's just as helpful as knowing exactly what's going on in the news. So understanding that like good civics isn't just limited to the information you consume, but how are you using it to help the people that are around you in your community too.
I love that. Thank you.
Okay.
Sarah, we'll come back to you. So, yeah, thank you.
Hi. I was just wondering if there was like a current news story that you felt was not being presented accurately on social media, or just, yeah.
Oh, that is a good question. Are you gonna stay after? I have to think about that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Can I think about that and then get back to you? All right, good. I want to think about that.
Hi, I was wondering if you have any thoughts about legacy media moving towards short-form content and if they'll be able to do that and capture younger audiences.
Oh, that's such a great question. Probably if they hired younger people. You know what I mean? Like, I think the thing about legacy institutions that I've noticed, the more that I've gotten to go to the offices, I'm like, oh, a lot of people have like a similar cookie cutter background here. And I think everybody doesn't have a cookie cutter background. So I think if everybody who you're asking to make social content has a very similar trajectory into journalism, then it's not gonna be successful. It's only gonna feed their cookie cutter people of their algorithm. So I think legacy institutions absolutely have a chance, also because they have the financial backing to make like really good short form content. And content is really expensive to make. Like, I mean, right, for me, I'm just putting my phone down, but when we talk about the editing, the fact checking that is expected behind like a big legacy institution to make a TikTok, it's very time consuming, it's a lot of finances. So I think they'll be fine in that aspect, but I think as long as at these legacy institutions, the people that are coming in and don't have very diverse and rich experiences in life, especially if most of them are coming from the same socioeconomic status, it will not be successful. And they will always be beat out by somebody who is just putting their phone down and telling it as it is. I always say that I think legacy institutions, especially because they have the means, have got to reach out to these influencers who are doing the best job that they can, giving out news and talking to them and working with them. So yes, but not if they kind of keep hiring the same exact people that they keep hiring and ignoring certain people.
And then up in the corner.
Hi, I was just wondering, I consume, I think, a lot of like commentary videos, because sometimes you have interests that like nobody in your real life shares or maybe cares about it as much as you do. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, I also love Housewives, and like last night I watched Salt Lake City, and like none of my friends watch it. So I go on TikTok and I look up, you know, what people are talking about it, and that's the only way that I can interact with someone about it. But I wonder for like news, like for me, I don't feel like I really talked about the news with people in my real life, because let's see if I read that like a woman got stabbed in the bus, like I know that's wrong, I know that was wrong. I don't want to like hear somebody say, well, she shouldn't have been in the bus at that hour, like there's always going to be that person that just has like a contradicting opinion. So I wondered, since you read a lot of print media, when you do choose to share something with your friends, is it usually something kind of like the cheese story, or are they usually like hard news?
It's usually the cheese stories. The last thing I would want is I opened up a letter that's not a bill, and it's like, look at this war going on. Like, for example, one of my sorority sisters, she's like a big dancer, and now she's pregnant. So like anything I see about pregnant people, I'm like, oh my God, read this. Or anything I see about a dance company. And I actually think you reminded me, that's the beauty of print, is I don't have a comment section. Like, I am the comment section, and also the comments that we are shown also has to do with our algorithm, right? Like, I feel like we know It's always wild, especially on Instagram and TikTok. The most hateful comment shows up at the top to incite a sense of emotion. So I think that removing the comment section from my news consumption by reading print has allowed me to detach myself from this like emotional reaction. And also I remember you have to kind of be in a very interesting place in life to like be laying sideways and type hateful things. You know, that's an interesting place to be in life. And unfortunately, a lot of that those hateful comments are what show up to get us more hateful. And I'm happy it's Elisa takedown season 2, just saying, in terms of Salt Lake City.
We have one up back in the back corner who's been very patient. All right, so, okay, at Vlada, and then he's had his hand up for a little while, so.
Hey, my question is, considering the fact that a lot of legacy media is manipulated by rich people and it influences, for example, the climate change discourse, how do you think it's being fixed in media landscape? Because only the bigger media outlets can afford to do research and get access to information often about important topics like that. So how do you see it being improved to improve what's going on in real world?
Yeah, so I have to, my only hope, literally for the legacy institutions that are owned by families, is that in the next about like 10 years, we're actually gonna go through one of the largest generational transfers of wealth. So all of these people who are owning a lot of legacy institutions and big companies are getting old, and they're gonna die, and they're gonna transfer their wealth to their younger generation. So my hope in terms of those institutions is that the younger people have some sense and actually understand that their wealth is pretty much the answer that will solve most of the issues throughout this country and the world. So I can only hope that their kids' brains are like screwed on right, but that's just a hope. But I also think it's going to be up to us to spend our dollars on media that is telling the stories that matter, and that we actually pay for good local independent journalism, because that hope that I discuss is just a hope. And I think we've seen traditionally how views are passed on generationally. So I think in part is that hope of legacy institutions, but also the hope among us that if we see that, for example, like a Mother Jones, they're funded fully by donations, right?
Yeah, they're funded primarily by a foundation.
Okay, by a foundation. Yeah. So I think like actually when these great publications ask for money, we maybe tried our best to give the dollar or encourage somebody who has the means to give to these foundations. So that's where I think the hope is unfortunately like still in the dollar and paying for it and getting people to realize why you should pay for media, you know?
Hi. I guess I want to start by saying I thought when you mentioned how reading print versus getting your news from social media, like how you have more agency in what you see, I thought that was very interesting. So I just wanted to say that. And I guess I have two questions. One question is you differentiated between getting your news from like reporters versus influencers. So I want to hear like why you think it's important to differentiate between the two. And I guess the other thing I thought was interesting is like why, I mean, I guess this is like more of a personal question, but like why don't you like sharing like the news you get with, or even if it's controversial, with people you know? I feel like, isn't it important to have that open discussion with people you know, and or like people whose opinion you value? Like, you know, like the whole basis of our society is that, you know, we learn from people around us and that we have open discourse and we get to hear their opinions, right? So I feel like, wouldn't it be better for you to share your opinions or share news articles to get, you know, people who you trust with opinion on things? Like if I see interesting news, I always share it with my father, and oftentimes we have different opinions, but I feel like that's a good thing, right? Because we can discuss and see who's right or who's wrong, or maybe it's neither of us, but I guess that's my two questions.
No, that's such a good question. I'm going to answer your second question first, and then the first question last or second. I think for me, I think it absolutely is important that I know like the opinions of who is hanging out with me and who I'm friends with. But I also feel like their opinions on controversial topics I hold as dear as I do of the things that naturally interest them, whether that's dance, whether that's theater, whether that's food, because ultimately when it comes to that really controversial topic we have to have, or conversation that I want to have with them, if I know that my friend loves fine dining, like having that conversation over fine dining can actually be a lot easier than I think just sending them something that I know might be a tricky conversation to have. And I also think, like when I think of sending my friends, I think this is specifically when I'm talking about like clipping out something and sending it in the mail. I feel like receiving a letter nowadays is such a unique experience that I want that unique experience to feel like it's happiness in a little letter, which we oftentimes don't get from our news. When it comes to controversial things going on in the world, I think I'm fortunate to have friends that keep up with the news and are educated, and well, I don't even want to say educated, I don't like when people say that, are like, kind of have like a wide variety of sources on what they're talking about, that I don't feel like I need to be the person that sends them those topics. But I also disagree with my friends on things, and I think it's good to disagree with people. And then in terms of your first question about the difference between influencers and reporters and journalists, I mean, like, how many people here are studying journalism by a raise of hands? Okay. There are like things that you all are learning in class that I will not have access to about how to actively and properly practice journalism. Whether you choose to go on that path, please do, or don't. But I think that there are things within the communications, media, and journalism world that people have become experts in, whether that's through lived experience, whether that's through college, whatnot. And even like a journalistic code of ethics. Like people who are influencers do not have to follow that. So I think it's important that people who are consuming the news, whether it's through news personalities and journalists, know the difference, because also the expectation of the work you produce is very different. For me as an influencer, the expectation is that you all interact with my content. For a journalist, the expectations are completely different. It needs to 100% be, you need to try your best for it to be factual, to not try to bleed your bias in. So the expectations of the work we produce are completely different, yet they end up in the same platform. So that's why I think it's important that people know the difference. Is there's somebody who's like an expert in what they're trying to tell you versus somebody whose expertise is garnering an audience, which is two totally different.
Right. If I can just double down on Kelsey's response. I've written for a number of publications that do not give you incentive for how many people. They just give you a rate for whatever the article, whether nobody reads it or 1 million people read it, you're going to get paid the same. Other publications will pay more for higher read rates. And what happens when you have a publication that pays more for a higher read rate is you sometimes unconsciously, sometimes very consciously, start writing to the audience, because you know that publication once published an article about how to, like, the top 10 things I wish I had known about playing Pokemon, or Pokemon Go. And it got over 1 million views. This person, or maybe 8 million views, I think. This person made $250,000 from that one stupid listicle. That article generated more wealth for that one person, that quote-unquote journalist, than the most important, consequential coverage about you name it. That is a problem. Yeah. And so I think, just to double down on this, journalists should not be writing. Your job is to do the best possible work that you can do. You want to engage your audience, you want to make it interesting, but you can't be writing, you can't let the market forces determine how you approach your writing, right? Yeah. We have, I didn't mean to.
No, like that was needed. Yeah, because I think also for an influencer, your basis of your money is your engagement. And so you're not tied for something to be important or factual. You're tied for it to do well and have virality. And that can lead us in some sticky places. So, yeah.
We have time for one more quick question. Anyone want to have the final? I saw your hand first, so right in the front row.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to come speak to us too. One question I had was, as you're seeing news evolve and change with like how people are consuming it, do you believe that there are any platforms or styles of news that are outdated or should not be used anymore, or do you think they're keeping all types is better?
That is such a great question. I have to say, I think any format of like the expectation of younger people sitting down for 30 minutes to an hour and watching the news is not happening anymore. But I also love doing that with my grandma. Like, I like to know what's going on in Tampa, Florida, and Brandon, Florida with her. So I do think that, unfortunately, that form is outdated, of the expectation that somebody will sit and consume what is going on in their local area for like 30 minutes to an hour. But that's just like my personal opinion. I don't really have that many friends who sit down and watch the news anymore. They might watch like 60 Minutes. That might be their thing, but I would say that form of broadcast journalism. I would also say broadcast journalism as a whole is very interesting to me, and how younger people's reaction to it. Like this, I think the broadcast TV voice, all of these things, I find that when I talk to younger generations, they don't feel meshed with that. They want somebody who uses their language on TV. They want somebody that talks with their hands and looks like them, and it doesn't feel so stush and upright. So I would say those spaces, I don't want to say they're outdated because I still have love for them, but I fear they are.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. Kelsey's going to hang out. There are baked goods. Professor McCarthy made brownies. I made chocolate chip cookies.
They're yummy.
Please hang out in the hallway. Kelsey will be here for a little while. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for coming, everyone.